running to Badlands. Explain those Badlands. That's a hell of a name.
Welcome to this week's Breaking History. We got a lot to go through, and it is now just around the bend. We're going to have a very, very important day, which here I'm speaking as a Canadian, and it took me a while to get the importance of what this day meant. Independence Day, of course, July 4th, tomorrow. So Gordon and I have a very special show today. I also, again, speaking as a Canadian, I'm going to contribute a few thoughts pertaining to a so-called national holiday we had in Canada on July 1st, just a few days ago, or 2 days ago, and contrast what's lacking, what's missing in that picture. So there's going to be a lot to talk about today. But first, before we do any of that stuff, we'll listen to a short word from our sponsor, Goldco. So without further ado, Goldco. Are you concerned about the $6 trillion at stake in the upcoming 2024 elections? The Wall Street Journal has reported a critical issue, the looming decision on extending tax cuts scheduled to expire after 2025. Republicans advocate for extending Trump's tax cuts, while Democrats lean towards letting them expire and increasing taxes on top earners and corporations, potentially creating a massive $6 trillion gap. But fear not, there is a way to protect yourself from this impending threat. Join the thousands of hardworking Americans who are taking proactive steps to safeguard their savings. Visit badlandsgold.com to claim your free 2024 gold and silver kit and fortify everything you've worked for. You may even qualify for up to 10% back in bonus silver, but hurry, supplies are limited. Don't leave your financial future up to chance. Act now to diversify and shield your savings against the uncertainties ahead. Get your 2024 gold and silver kit today at badlandsgold.com and take control of your financial destiny. Okay, so I'm seeing that Gordon might have some issues, technical issues. Gordon, can you hear me right now?
No, I'm back. Sorry, I had to. There's something going on with my charger. Yeah. Hello, everybody. Welcome to the 4th of July Breaking History special, American Revolution style special. I'm at my in-laws' house. So the last time I streamed from here was on Badlands Daily, and I don't have the lights on in here, and I have like windows that are giving me a nice, pleasing daylight. But at like 11 o'clock in the morning when I was on Daily, this massive storm rolled in and like blacked out everything. Like it got dark in the middle of the day, and literally people said I was in a cave. So hopefully that doesn't happen again. Got clear sky.
Don't jinx it.
I'm getting a little bit of choppiness. They had a bad storm here the other night, took out the electricity, took out the internet. The internet just came back yesterday. So hopefully it's not as choppy for everyone else. And if it is, just let me know and maybe we can try to fix it. But look at that. We got Patel Patriot has raided the stream. What's up? What's up, Raiders? Love that. But yeah, man. Yeah, we have some really great stuff to talk about today. There's so many different things to talk about. We probably won't get to everything. We're going to start 4th of July early this year. It's a day early. Who cares? Next year, Trump said that next year we're going to start on Memorial Day 2024, and we're going to have a celebration that lasts until 4th of July 2025. Memorial Day 2025, and it goes until 4th of July 2026. So a 13-month American celebration. He announced that last year. So this year we're going to start a day early. We're going to do the whole weekend, 4th of July. Not celebrating Joe Biden, not celebrating the deep state, but celebrating the fact that we are going to conclude what the founding fathers started in 1775, because that revolution never finished. It continued on and on and on and on for 200 and where are we at? 250 years?
Thereabouts, yeah. And I think it's an important point, because there's an oft quoted statement made by Benjamin Franklin at the Constitutional Convention, with the famous apocryphal tale of the woman who asks, "What have you created? What have you given us?" And he says, "A republic, if you can keep it." Now, that conditional aspect of "if you can keep it" is obviously based upon a profound insight that he and other founding fathers truly understood, that the fight was just getting started. The battle was won, but it was a battle. It wasn't the end all war that some have have treated so many of these wars. It was literally just that now we are unleashing a new type of society as an experiment into the world that had never existed before. And now the challenge is going to be, can we actually finalize it, like consummate what we have done here on paper, but actually walk the walk? And that took some bumps in the road, right? Like there were some birth pangs along the way to resolve some of the internal contradictions baked into the compromises made in 1776 and 1787, pertaining to the question of the 3/5 clause of a slave. Are they a human? Are they a possession? What is it? That had to be fought for, bled over. There were fights. It's a process. But if we don't relive and re-examine this history with every generation, and we start taking things for granted as if these rights are something that we're not fought for, but we're just sort of given to us, then we're screwed. We create all of these blind spots, which we could see being capitalized on over the past 50, 60 years by a lot of very, very soft-minded, mushy people who didn't realize, who were disconnected from this tradition, from this history. And thus we could just see how a little bit of comfort given to people under the guise of a consumer society, living the high life, coming out of World War II, became the thing that had us mistake that our chains were our comforts, that freedom was slavery. And Benjamin Franklin said also that those who would trade their freedoms for security deserve neither. So yeah, it's going to be a good exercise, an important exercise for that reason, what we're doing today.
Before we get into the meat of it, because my internet, it's really choppy for me. I'm hoping it's not the same for y'all. Hopefully it's just on my end. It might be because I have this Miro window open. Let me do a quick little current event thing that I think is kind of concurrent to what the spirit of this topic today. And then I can shut that window down and we can get back to the show. So
Sure.
I want to present this. Some really, really cool news broke the other day, and that it really got my jimmies rustled. Boom. So you get, I don't have the full picture right there, but that's Eric Trump, Don Jr., the CEO way over here on the left of Dar Global, which is a Dubai-based Saudi real estate developer, and then their subsidiary Dar Al Arkan, which is a Saudi real estate firm, signing a deal to build a Trump Tower in Jeddah, which is like the port city of Saudi Arabia. Just to give you an idea, it's about right here, right in the middle of Saudi Arabia. It's their port city. It's kind of a luxury beach town, and this all fits perfectly in with Crown Prince MBS's vision 2030 of converting the entire Red Sea coast, which is this coastline, into what he describes as the next French Riviera, in terms of like an iconic tourist destination. He wants to make Saudi Arabia kind of the conference center for the entire world, the center of the world geographically. You also have concurrently with that, you have Trump has there was an announcement back in March. Trump organization signed in 2022 a leasing deal where they leased their name to a golf resort in Oman. They then announced in March that they were doing a villa kind of like development, $200 million. They then announced the same day, or not the same day, I guess it was last Friday, that they were going to be upping that to $500 million. So $500 million worth of like villas. This is in Oman. You have that is also with Dar Global, same developer. And then Dar Global that same day last week, I think it was June 27th, a big story was reported by Newsweek that Dar Global is investing for the first time ever. You have this Saudi developer investing $300 million in residential projects in New York, like in the United States for the first time ever. New York City, Miami, and LA. I mean, marketplaces that aren't necessarily MAGA, but soon enough they will be. Actually, I think MAGA is in Miami and New York, but I'm sure it's in LA as well. But this is all part of what Trump has described as we are going to make America great again by getting good investment partners. We're going to get cooperation. People who've never invested money before in the United States are going to be investing money there. We are going to be investing in foreign countries and building relationships, not in an imperial NATO vassal style system of like neo-feudalism, but in a bilateral, mutually beneficial partnership where everybody wins and everybody prospers and everybody's life improves. Everybody, like the rising tide lifts all ships, so to speak. And this fits in with all of that. So Trump Tower in Saudi Arabia. Let's go. MAGA is coming to Saudi Arabia. MAGA works for Arabia as well. Make Arabia great again, right? So
Absolutely.
we have, unfortunately, a lot of things to celebrate. It's also worth noting that the American Revolution was a global war, in that battles took place all around the world. You had battles taking place. You had battles taking place in Britain. You had John Paul Jones sailing across the ocean by himself in one ship to take on the entire British fleet. The American colonial legislature called him insane. They're like, you're insane. And he's like, yes, I am insane, but I'm going to go show you how we're going to fight these people. And he started raiding by himself the coastline of Britain. Whenever he was attacked by a ship, they asked him, they said, well, what are you going to do when you get attacked by a ship? He said, well, their ships will become my ships. And that's exactly what he did. And there was that really amazing moment where they were ambushed by 3 ships in the English Channel, which is right here. They were ambushed just off of Dover in the English Channel. And the crew was about to mutiny against John Paul Jones, because he wasn't allowing them to raid. He wasn't allowing them to go into people's homes and steal things and like loot and pillage. He was only allowing them to burn down like the like the ship works, like the places where they built the ships. He wasn't allowing them to go steal people's money and stuff.
Yeah.
So they were all like, well, what's the point of this? Why are we doing this if we're not going to get rich doing it? So they were going to mutiny. Then these 3 ships show up, and John Paul Jones jumps on the wheel and masterfully maneuvers around all these ships. So he pulls up right next to the main flagship, and they're able to engage it. They end up defeating it, taking it down. And the crew is in such awe of how well he piloted that situation and was able to get them out of that they went back to naming him captain and not wanting to mutiny against him. They're like, wow, this guy literally, he was like Han Solo of the American Revolution. He was wanted by the British authorities prior to the war. He hid out in North Carolina with his family. His name was just John Paul at that time. He was super sick, very, very sick. I think he had, I don't know if it was dysentery or whatever it was, but the British can't come to this house looking for him, the Jones family. And, if they caught him, they're going to hang him. The kids put him underneath the crawl space of the house, kind of like Anne Frank style, put him in the crawl space, hide under there with him. He's coughing up his lungs. They're like covering his mouth. If they catch the family hiding this guy, they're going to hang the family too at this point. They don't catch him. He's so touched by it that he changes his name legally to John Paul Jones after their family. The father in the family had connections to the colonial Congress. He's the one who helps get him commissioned to get a ship. And that's what leads to his adventure into Britain. When they sailed, he was the first person to fly a flag, the red, white, and blue flag. It wasn't the final iteration of the American flag, but it was his own making. He stitched together his own red, white, and blue stars and stripes. He was the first person to ever fly that on a ship. And when they sailed into the Netherlands after raiding Britain, they didn't recognize the flag. And so under international law, if you were flying a flag but nobody understood, you were a pirate. And so they arrested him and they were going to hang him as a pirate. And then, of course, in this lynch mob, a man shows up and says, I know this guy. He is a dear friend of mine, actually, and you are not going to hang him. I will vouch for him personally. And that man was Benjamin Franklin, who happened to be in France at the time. He happened to be in France, on a diplomatic mission, and heard this was happening. So then he immediately departs, goes to the Netherlands, says, this guy is a hero. He's one of ours. He's not a pirate. Don't hang him. And because of that, when they built a new ship for him, the French built John Paul Jones a new ship. He calls it the Sorbonne. What was it called? Let me get this right. He names it after.
And is this before the League of Armed Neutrality? Oh, sorry.
This is the U.S. the Bonhomme Richard. So the Bonhomme Richard, which means in French it means the Good Richard, and that was a reference to Ben Franklin's Good Richard's Almanac, because every year Franklin would put out what was called Good Richard's Almanac, and that was like, it was a scientific book that kind of gave farmers astrological occurrences and like weather patterns, and it gave farmers a blueprint for how to plant their crops and what to expect in the upcoming year.
Well, it's funny. I actually
Richard's Almanac.
I think it was actually possibly a hybrid, because you had I think it was actually called Poor Richard's Almanac, but he Benjamin Franklin would write his name as Silence Dogood. So Benjamin Franklin's one of his many pseudonyms or nom de plumes was Silence Dogood. And so I think that what John Paul Jones was doing was a bit of a hybrid name for the ship. But that's fascinating. And this is before, what year are we talking here? Is this before like 1780, before the League of Armed Neutrality, or is this after that? Probably before that.
This would have. I believe John Paul Jones was 1779 is when he got the he took command of the 42-gun USS Bonhomme Richard. Richard. That was not the ship that he sailed in that first time. So he went to Britain a few times and attacked a few times. And that then inspired other captains to follow suit. And then you had other captains now saying, well, dude, if he's going, like, we got to go too. And so then you had multiple ships sailing over to Britain to fight the British on their own turf. You also had battles happening in other places as well, in Africa, down in the Indian Ocean. Remember, the East India Company, that was really the real enemy. They were the ones when the Boston Tea Party happens in 1773. Yeah, 1773. The tea that was being thrown into the bay, into the Boston Harbor, was the East India Company tea. And the reason that they were throwing the tea in there was because the East India Company was going bankrupt because of the overwhelming corruption in their organization. And they had this like an excess supply of tea, way more tea than they knew what to do with. So what the Crown did and what Parliament did to help out their friends in the company was they imposed a tariff on all teas in the colonies that weren't East India Company teas. So you basically were forced to buy East India Company tea, and that's what inspired them to dress up like Indians, go on those ships, and throw that tea into the harbor.
Yeah.
So the East India Company was very much the enemy in the American Revolution, a corporate enemy.
Yeah. Well, I think it's important to have this whole, again, this historical and global context in mind, because people, the hacks who are largely courtier whores for, things like the Council on Foreign Relations, a lot of the textbooks that have created a lot of the official narratives of how we think of that period of history, has reduced things down to, these belligerent English colonists didn't want to pay their taxes. They didn't like paying a tea tax. And so those cheapskates decided to cause trouble. And they just, that inspired them to make their own country. No taxation without representation is a big one. And sure enough, that's an important one, as is the question of unnecessary, price manipulation around a product that everybody tends to use a lot, like tea. But no. If you actually look at it, the no taxation without representation was number 17 on the list of on the Declaration of Independence. There's a massive list of intolerable acts that the British have done to the Americans and to the world. And it's number 17 on the list. There's a lot of material on there that showcase what the reasons for establishing a republic are. It's like, no, you don't just go and do that. You don't wake up one morning saying, I don't like paying these taxes to a government overseas that's, and so I'm going to risk my life and my family's life to, no. And you don't do that. You don't take those risks for tea. There's an understanding that was a symbol for a broader global British East India Company control system over the entirety of the world. And it touches on directly what you were saying, because by going into Saudi Arabia, I love that you did that. You went straight into the Muslim world and the revival of a relationship that Trump has worked very hard to recalibrate as part of a renewal of the world today, which is very real. It's a very important thing. You brought in also John Paul Jones, and John Paul Jones also was an advisor to Catherine the Great. That can't be forgot. He was actually pioneering the creation of the Russian Navy, as well as having been this incredible war hero in the American cause. And I've got an image. Do you mind if I just show an image before we look at your images?
Yes, please.
Yeah. Or actually, you know what? Let's do that. Yeah, I just saw you have some maritime choke points there. Yeah, let's do that. Let's actually look at the world. Yeah. Okay. So here.
Yeah.
What do you want to go through there?
So you bring up a great point. Like after the American Revolution, John Paul Jones, just to wrap up his story. He's a sailor, man. He's an adventurer. Like I said, kind of like the real life Han Solo, but with a really thick Scottish accent. He then leaves, goes to Russia. We've talked about before how Russia, Catherine the Great, had a great admiration for Benjamin Franklin, probably maybe even more than an admiration, perhaps. And he goes there. She appoints him as a rear admiral in the Russian Navy. He spends most of the rest of his days sailing around the Black Sea, Ukraine, where we've all become very familiar with that whole story. And he dies in France. And then later, I think it was around the 1900s, they go and they get his body from France. They bring him back. He's now buried in the water off Annapolis at the Naval Academy. That they built like a tomb for him. He's considered the father of the U.S. Navy. That's the distinction they've given him. And so maritime choke points. What was fascinating about this, Matt, I thought you would appreciate this. I am a nerd who kind of studies the Saudi foreign ministry like obsessively. A lot of crazy stuff happened yesterday. They were hosting all kinds of meetings, all kinds of phone calls. Faisal bin Farhan flew to Estonia. But one of their other diplomats hosted Dr. Al-Rasi. He hosted the UN with Senegal, Indonesia, Malaysia, Namibia, Nicaragua, and Palestine, which sound like really, really random countries. When you look at that list, you're like, okay, whatever. Then you go and you look at the map. So here, this map right here, these are considered the primary global maritime choke points. The three major ones would be the Panama Canal and the Suez Canal. Those are both man-made canals. You then also have the Strait of Malacca over here in between Indonesia and Malaysia. Those are considered the three most important choke points, like maritime global trade choke points. The other secondary ones would be the Cape of Good Hope down here in South Africa, down here in the tip of South America, Morocco, here at Gibraltar, here at Turkey, going into the Black Sea. We've talked about that one before. Of course, you have the Strait of Hormuz. You have the Aden Sea, like we've heard about the Houthis attacking the ships going to Israel. So when you look at where these countries are located, look at how Nicaragua, it's right there next to Panama, Palestine, there next to Suez Canal, Malaysia and Indonesia together form the Strait of Malacca, and that's how you access the South China Sea. And this is where enormous trade happens right here. So much trade happens right here. And to get from the Indian Ocean into the South China Sea to access China from the west, you have to go through the Strait of Malacca. And then you have Namibia down here by the Cape of Good Hope. You have Senegal, not too far from Gibraltar. So just a weird mix of countries, but it just made me think about. I was like, oh, those are all nearby choke points. Then I went and checked. I was like, oh yeah, they really are.
Yeah.
I don't know if it means anything. I don't know. I don't know what to make of it, but
no, you're right. So. No, that's exactly how to think about it, because that's how it's always been. You have to kind of think on the one hand, like the oligarchy, vicariously putting your shoes into, and that's where it's difficult for a lot of people because it's so unnatural of a culture of when we say the oligarchy, I'm presuming everybody here has a general idea of what we're talking about, but the hereditary caste that self-identifies as the born masters of the world that have to revive some form of feudal technocratic paganism to reassert what they believe to be their lost controls that certain little things like Christianity disrupted back 2,000 years ago. And there's been a consistent effort to bring that back on the part of an inbred grouping of a closed oligarchy for a very long time. And so one of the things that they do is they always think global. There's always the idea of as big as you could think top down in both space and time is how the oligarchy kind of thinks. So you have to put yourself in the shoes, because the good people who are effective throughout history at combating this thing are not only thinking on the level of the enemy, but bigger still, because they actually have people like Benjamin Franklin and most of the founding fathers. I won't say all of them. There are some that had more or less problems epistemologically speaking, but what they were all in alignment with was natural law. The oligarchy is in defiance of natural law because they're trying to impose their own selfish, godlike desires onto the entirety of the universe. The idea of which evidence completely betrays. Everywhere you look in nature, as well as in human society or human babies, there's only evidence that human beings and the universe is made good, reasonable and good, that are true. Though we could be selfish and arrogant and do terrible things, every baby has this natural spark of goodness, and we're happier when we're reasonable, good, working together, and we think global. So Benjamin Franklin was thinking very global and planning decades and decades before the American Revolution itself. So it's good that you looked at the choke points, because that's actually something that I'm going to throw in here for a little, just to like bounce off of some of the things you said. There's a couple of images I just want to get people to appreciate that. Here in Canada, we are told that the American Revolution was about Britain versus the United States, and that's it. It's overly simplistic. Canada is treated, and it's nice to have this contrast because, again, like I said, it was the Canadian national holiday, Canada Day, on July 1st. And we are told in our textbooks, and this has been the case for over 200 years, that we are better than the Americans because we knew that just by being patient, the mother country would eventually grant us the freedoms that the Americans foolishly had to go and bleed for and die for and be so disruptive, Now, and we're not told about what you just mentioned about the international dynamics at all. John Paul Jones, Russia, all of this stuff. No. But so just a few examples, like you have leaders from Poland, from France, from Prussia, who were all leading figures in the American Revolution. The middle one is Czechoslovakia, who's the Polish resistance leader, who was coming in training American soldiers. You have Marquis de Lafayette on the left, who brought in a massive contingent of the French Republicans who were sanctioned and given support by Louis XVI to go and assist the rebels in their fight against the British Empire. And again, a lot of them had their own reasons. Marquis de Lafayette was a very good man, but it doesn't mean every French officer, the officers I think were generally good idealists, but the people within the aristocracy who were organized by Benjamin Franklin, some of them had the right reasons, some of them had their own real politic reasons, like their own idea that we can weaken the British Empire, our rival, and thus become our own French global empire. You did have some of that. That's a fact, but that's the way history works. You had Catherine the Great on the left. You had her close ally, Ekaterina Deshkova, who was the president of the Russian Academy of Sciences. And it was through Ekaterina Deshkova, who was working in France at the time, that Benjamin Franklin became the first American member of the Russian Academy of Sciences. And she became the first member of the American Philosophical Society that Ben Franklin had created years earlier. And it was through her that she got the message and was able to organize Catherine the Great to create the League of Armed Neutrality with the Netherlands, with France, with Spain. And that gave the American colonists the space that they needed to receive the support, the financial, the other munitions from countries of Europe that gave them a very important edge in the fight against the British Empire. Because again, this is like a bunch of farmers who didn't have a lot of training. That's why they needed a lot of the Prussian volunteers to go down and train the Americans to fight guerrilla warfare style and other things, to get the discipline for farmers to do this properly. And the French were also very, very key in this. And so it's weird that you had like both the good and bad Prussians, right? You had like the Hessian mercenaries being on, and then you had a whole network of Republicans from Prussia as well, who also want to overthrow the hereditary system. So that's a fun irony that has direct implication on what's going on today too. Yeah.
Here's an interesting little trivial fact about that as well. You know which bank financed the because like you just said, the British hired those 30,000 Hessian mercenaries. They were considered the elite of the elite, like the top mercenaries in the world were the Hessian mercenaries at the time. So they bring in these 30,000 Hessians, they send them to Massachusetts, and they basically chase George Washington all the way from Massachusetts across New York, across New Jersey, into Pennsylvania, and almost defeat him. And his first victory was 18 months after they started fighting Battle of Trenton, the night of Christmas, 1776. And then that was when he decided, look, we know that Germans love to drink on Christmas. We know they're going to be drunk on Christmas night. Let's wait for them to get drunk. Let's wait for them to go to sleep, and we're going to ambush them. And that was the first time George Washington ever implemented irregular warfare. And after implementing the asymmetric warfare, that's when he realized that this is how I'm going to win the war. I need asymmetric warfare. He started putting snipers in trees. He started doing ambushes. And of course, Francis Marion, who I wrote about last summer in South Carolina, you probably have seen the movie The Patriot with Mel Gibson. That was actually a true story. I wrote about in that Substack article about how that story actually was supposed to be presented as a true story, but British academics got very angry at the producers and said, if you make this movie, we're going to destroy your reputation. So they negotiated and decided that we're going to change the names, pretend it's fiction. And but it actually all happened. The scene of them burning the church down with the people inside was artistic license, but there was a lot of butchery that happened. That the bad guy in the movie was based on a real guy who actually called Ban the Butcher, who actually did rape, his men raped women. They killed civilians. They killed 200 Virginia regiment men who had surrendered, and so he got the name Ban the Butcher. Benostra Tarleton was his name, all-time villain name, by the way. So basically the bank that funds the Hessian mercenaries is called Barings Bank. Now, where have we heard of Barings Bank before? Barings Bank, that guy Evelyn Baring, he's the person that the British put in charge of Egypt in 1879 when Egypt was bankrupt because of the Suez Canal. So they go bankrupt. They have to give their shares in the Suez Canal to the British, their British and French partners. And Britain says, all right, well, you're bankrupt now. Your government's bankrupt. So we need to put a comptroller in charge of your government to supervise everything. Make sure you're not going to, renege on these payments you need to make because you have to file for bankruptcy. The banker they put in charge of it was Evelyn Baring. His bank is his family's bank is the Prussian bank who financed that mercenary, the Hessian mercenaries for the British in the Revolution. And that was when Egypt was officially brought into the British Empire, kind of to bring it all full circle back to the Suez Canal and the global maritime choke points.
That's beautiful. No, that's really good. Because, again, and that whole period in the 1870s, 1880s, another high dense period. And I would say that would be the second American Revolution. I see at this point in my research, when I look at that period of the Civil War and the few decades after the Civil War, as far as the international global dynamics are concerned, I see that as just like I see World War I and World War II at this point as one war with a little bit of a pause in between, like an intermezzo. I see the same thing there, 1776 to 1783, and as one chapter of one fight, which continued in chapter 2. First of all, I guess chapter 2 would be actually 1812. The War of 1812, and then chapter 3 would be the Civil War and the years after that, because there was a major fight once again around the global dynamics. America, the reason why America survived the Civil War was because largely Russia intervened with their navy, right? And you had just like Catherine the Great organized the League of Armed Neutrality and gave massive support to the U.S. cause. So too did you also have Russia under Alexander II, her great-grandson, who also sent the Russian Navy down to the coast of the USA in New York and San Francisco, and Russian soldiers were paraded in the streets of New York and Broadway and celebrated as champions. That was a message to the British and the French. Go on. Yeah.
Hey, Matt, keep going. I'm gonna back out. Everyone's saying my connection's bad. I'm gonna do something to my router real quick and jump back in. Just give me a minute. I'm gonna jump out and come
I'll
back.
just rant.
You
I'll just do my thing.
You keep ranting. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Good luck. Yeah. So all that to say, there was a massive international fight around extending what Lincoln had revived as far as this American system of constitutional banking, the right to utilize a national protective tariff, which was something that also emerged out of the American Revolutionary cause, was the idea that, no, as a sovereign nation, to be sovereign means you have to have your own manufacturing to stand on your own 2 feet economically. So it's not just like words on parchment, but that means that you have to utilize the right to protect your local you have to incubate your local industry and protect them from the dumping of cheap goods like the British had been doing for decades and decades against the early American colonies. Every time you had the effort to create like the sawdust ironworks of early colonial Massachusetts, that was destroyed by British dumping of goods, horseshoes, hats, clothing, other things that the British had monopolized industrially by destroying India in the as early as the 1680s. They started getting into India and subverting the Indian economy, and also then China around the Opium Wars. They were destroying the economic base of existence for the countries that they would then go in to dominate. And then once they didn't have industrial power, they were dependent on who had the monopoly over that industrial power. And then with that dependency, then they were able to get them enmeshed in usurious debts, through the Bank of England, through the British East India Company, through Barings Bank, as Gordon had just mentioned. Hey, Gordon, you're back. Good. All right. How's that? It's looking good so far. Let's fingers crossed. I was just basically continuing on that line, but the point here regarding that outcome after the Civil War that I really, because I was just describing here the spread of American system protective tariffs, the American system national banking procedures that Lincoln had revived, which gave the right to the nation to emit credit for for specific projects, not just for speculation, but for projects that then could be invested in the private sector that were tied to the national needs, the objectively true criteria of the nation to increase its ability to sustain more life, overcome limits to growth. Things like the Malthusian trap was what it was known as, even in Lincoln's own time. This is what Benjamin Franklin was even refuting in his essays on a paper currency, as well as his observations concerning the increase of mankind in 1752. Benjamin Franklin is demonstrating why Malthus, before Malthus was even writing his crappy essays about why overpopulation is like built into the fabric of the universe, Benjamin Franklin was already drafting proofs why more people means more value. We are the greatest resource because our minds are discovery machines. If you give babies the education, the inspiration, and the freedom to use their minds the way it should, they will make discoveries and overcome the constraints of former systems that had been monopolized by whatever technologies were available. So same thing after the Civil War. You had this idea that, okay, the American experiment is viable. It proved itself. And now you had those who saved America in Russia, bringing in the American system through things like, got this image here of the Trans-Siberian Railway with some of the American system allies, the transport minister and first prime minister of Russia, Sergei Witte, Dmitry Mendeleev on the upper right-hand side. You have even Vyshnegradsky on the bottom left-hand side. And of course, the assassinated Tsar Alexander II, the great liberator, because he also freed the serfs, right as Lincoln was freeing passing the Emancipation Proclamation. But these were the guys who then brought in American engineers, American-made locomotives. They applied the American system to build the Trans-Siberian Railway to break free of British-controlled choke points, because Britain's control of they were the empire of the sea, to the degree that everybody was not building and developing their internal capacities over, like, as land-based economies. They would be dependent and addicted to activity that was consolidated and dominated by the British Empire. So if you could all of a sudden build something like this, and keep in mind the American Transcontinental Railway, this was begun during the Civil War in 1863, and it was finished in 1869. But the idea was always that this was going to connect up with this, That's why they built it. That's why Alaska was sold in 1867 to the Americans in something that Seward had organized, the Secretary of State, who survived his own assassination attempt. And the idea was, once Alaska is sold, to extend telegraph lines. There were two companies in Russia and America that were both given sanction by the Russian and American governments. In 1863, under Lincoln, he signed off on it to extend telegraph lines, followed up by rail lines that were going to extend through the Bering Strait. And one of the guys who was inside, like a major insider, was this dude I've spoken about before. I've written a whole book on him, William Gilpin, who was Lincoln's bodyguard, his part of his elite 11-man team bodyguard. He was known as the father of manifest destiny. He was one of the first people to bring in, to champion the transcontinental railway in America in 1843. He was the first governor of the Colorado Territory. He led the battle at Glorieta Pass that stopped the opening up of a Western front in America, utilizing a state-backed version of Lincoln's greenbacks. And then after the war, he was organizing internationally for what he calls here as Gilpin's American Economic Just and Correct Map of the World in 1890. And he had a lot of friends in Russia who were promoting this exact same thing. Tsar Nicholas II brought in American engineers to do feasibility studies on the connection. It's 100 kilometers of separation between the two continents. And as you can see, like, it's totally liberated from British maritime choke points, the whole thing. And it involves the connection of the Suez Canal area here by rail through Panama. That would have been built up. That's what McKinley was even championing and fighting for when he was killed in 1901, was the connection of rail down through Mexico and into South America through the Panama region. You have here China. You had allies and reformers in China who were trying to put this into motion there too. It would connect all the way down to Africa. So it was a huge deal. And this was, again, being supported just like you had Russia, Germany, both a good and a bad version, but same thing in the Civil War. You had Otto von Bismarck as a major ally, Friedrich List, who studied in America and then brought the American system in 1850s to Russia, to Germany, to unite Germany as one nation for the first time. That was Friedrich List, the guy on the right, who was assassinated. Otto von Bismarck, he was ousted in a British-run coup that had a stupid Kaiser fall for British lies that he was trying to take, that Bismarck was trying to take control. But in fact, Bismarck was actually keeping Germany out of the traps that Britain and France were setting for it. And France was setting up an alliance with Britain because this guy, Sadi Carnot, the president, was assassinated in 1895. And his anarchist assassination resulted in a coup in France that then involved France getting enmeshed with Britain, even though they had formerly been pro-American for most of that time. And that's Sergei Witte on the left. So you have these international dynamics of the Civil War period to break British control points. And just like in the American Revolution, where you had all of these people, you had Tipu Sultan, who was the son of Hyder Ali, the two Muslim Southern Indian revolutionaries who wrote letters into the Continental Congress saying every blow that is struck in the cause of American liberty throughout the world, in France and in India and elsewhere, and so long as a single insolent savage tyrant remains, the struggle shall continue. And this guy's writing this to Washington, the Continental Congress, saying, like, your fight is our fight. His fight against the British in India went on for a decade with his father, Hyder Ali. This is actually a painting from, if you go into the NASA headquarters, this is one of the paintings on the mural, because this is the first example of high precision rocketry developed by the Muslim Indians against the British, wiping out these perfectly, like, these marching formal Cartesian British soldiers who would, like, march in formation, had no idea of how to actually, like, fight properly. It's all about the rules, as you noted with the Patriot question. What they're going through in terms of, like, the creativity of fighting for freedom and the need to go for guerrilla warfare, break the rules. If you got to break the rules, you break the rules. You're fighting for freedom here. And that's what the Indians were doing. And they were just annihilating the British Army. And the British Army ended up stealing this technology, calling it their own, and then using it like a decade later. But this absorbed 20% of the global British Navy that was supposed to go towards fighting the Americans, that got sucked into now fighting in India, which again created a massive space for the Americans to fight. The French came in, and again, the guy who organized this U.S. Indian relationship was Benjamin Franklin, and that's Ambassador Suffren, the French ambassador, who was organizing the head Hyder Ali. And again, Ben Franklin is the key. He is everywhere. And that's Mysore down there in southern India, the last part of India to be taken over because their love for freedom was so strong. And again, Benjamin Franklin behind Emperor Sidi Muhammad, the first nation in the world to recognize America as a sovereign nation state, was Morocco. Of all the nations, it was Morocco. And Emperor Sidi Muhammad of Morocco, 1777, he creates a protection, a deal with the Americans to protect them from Barbary pirates. So all of the American ships were getting attacked by Barbary pirates from Algeria, Tunisia, and beyond. And these Barbary pirates were proxies for the British Empire. The British were basically telling them where to go to get to basically find your slaves. And America was losing a lot of people, and they were getting like sucked into slavery in North Africa. And Sidi Muhammad comes in because he's again organized by Benjamin Franklin. The French have a huge embassy in Morocco, and so he protects the American shipping. So it's again this Muslim Indian all over Europe. I mean, the Irish had 20 generals who devoted themselves to the cause to help train the Americans too. The Irish Republicans were huge. There was an Irish Republican uprising in the 1790s, 98 that was unfortunately put down because the British were getting more sophisticated. They especially figured it out when they subverted the French Revolution in 1789. So the British were getting very good at taking these freedom-oriented movements and turning them into color revolutions through provocateurs, agents. A lot of Masonic operations were deployed at that time, which they did again to unfortunately. Ireland. They did it to France twice in 1789 and then again in 1830, taking what could have been a massive milestone in human history and turning it into a bloodbath. But that being said, everything has been about stopping people from thinking about the international dynamics of 1776 and then again in 1865 and beyond. So that was just my little mini contribution. And I got a thing to say later on about Canada, but that's just based on what you were saying.
No, that was all. That's all amazing, and I'm so glad you said all that. I was going to save this for later, but I'm just going to tie it in now because it makes sense. It's really important. What you just said is really so important. What I said at the beginning, this was truly was a worldwide conflict, and it's something that inspired other colonies throughout the British Empire to rebel against them, and this basically started the worldwide revolution to liberating people from liberating colonies, liberating civilizations, societies from British rule, from the unipolar hegemony, as we call it today. This is a really, really fascinating anecdote that I want to share real quick. So we've talked about the Pale Settlement 2 weeks ago. That was 1791. About 19 years before that, 1772, you had what was called the Partition of Poland. So in 1772, Putin gave that history to Tucker, how the Polish Lithuanian Commonwealth was giving Russia problems. They went to war, fought for many, many years, and then ultimately the Polish Empire, the Polish kingdom, gets subdivided between Prussia, Russia, and Austria. That happens in 1772. Now, up until that point, you had what was called, and people who've been on 4chan have probably seen these memes everywhere. If you've ever seen this image before, these guys who ride into battle with these wings on their back, these are called the winged hussars of Poland. And so these were considered like the elite of the elite of cavalry units in Europe. We talked about how in Eastern Europe you have these enormous fields because of the steppe that runs all the way to Mongolia. So that's where all the horses come from. So Poland cultivated this culture of having really, really great horsemen, really, really great cavalry units. So when Poland is partitioned in 1772, these cavalry guys, what do they do? Where do they go? So you have this guy named Casimir Pulaski, and he's approached by none other than Benjamin Franklin, who is traveling all over the world, all over Europe at the time, and he's basically just recruiting allies everywhere. And he goes to this guy and he says, "Look, you're the leader of these guys, the Winged Hussars. We need a cavalry. We have zero cavalry in America." George Washington didn't even know how to use cavalry because all of his military experience came from the French and Indian War in the 1750s, where basically there wasn't any cavalry used because the terrain of Eastern America, like the Eastern United States, it's not conducive to cavalry warfare. It's very mountainous. It's very, very, so they didn't really use a lot of cavalry. Therefore, George Washington doesn't really even know how to use cavalry. This guy comes over and creates the American cavalry unit. He's considered the father of the American cavalry. His other nickname is the Son of Liberty, or I'm sorry, the Soldier of Liberty. And so I have this article that I've written that I haven't published yet that will be part of the Patriot Chronicles called "The Last Ride of the Winged Hussars," and that's those guys that I just showed coming over to America, taking off their wings, putting on American uniforms, and becoming the American cavalry. And
that's cool.
These stories are all over the place. You have the Haitian slaves like down in Haiti that rebelled against the French and became formed like the slave colony, like the slave nation that becomes Haiti later.
Yeah, Saint Dominic.
The king, the one guy, the guy who became king. He was the only king in Haiti's history, and then they got put down. He's an 11-year-old drummer boy in a Haitian regiment that sails up with Lafayette to Georgia to fight at the Battle of Savannah in the 1770s. All part of like the Francis Marion story. It's all connected to that. And this guy Pulaski is at the Battle of Savannah. So at one battle, you have this guy Pulaski, you have Lafayette, you have this 11-year-old drummer boy who will later grow up and become the one and the only king of Haiti. And their story is pretty incredible because it's the only time that an African slave population has overthrown the masters and become their own sovereign nation.
Which they were never forgiven for,
very
right?
Cool.
Like they were never forgiven for that defiance. And yeah, on that note too, Toussaint Louverture, who is like the founding father in so many ways of Haiti, drafted the Haitian Constitution with the help of Alexander Hamilton, who co-drafted that thing with Toussaint, and then Haiti became the world's second republic. People don't often think of Haiti as being like the world's second republic. Like that was the explosion of this idea of nations built around freedom. And again, the fact that they weren't able to build up their economy, they were always sabotaged. You always had traitors after this rich period at the start installed to keep them undermined. And Lincoln deployed his guy, Frederick Douglass, the guy who was a freed slave, to be the American ambassador. I don't know if it was the first American ambassador. No, it couldn't have been. But the American ambassador to Haiti under Lincoln and after Lincoln was Frederick Douglass, which again, there was a very different idea of both Liberia, what Liberia could have been as far as like an advanced industrial nation state, where the freedom was given to the Africans that had been stolen from their home country to say, look, if you want to go back, we'll help you. We'll help you build an economy. That's what Ulysses S. Grant was all for. Same thing for the Haitians. Like the idea of the real Americans were, hey, let's help you build a real industrially advanced economy so you could stand on your own 2 feet. And that was not tolerated. The traitors in America, the skull and bones operators, whenever they took control, would always sabotage these types of beautiful ideas and would then work to create these Anglo-American treacherous special relationships to keep these nations underdeveloped, economically enslaved, which is a little bit more difficult to see than the real physical slavery. And so people wonder, well, why is Haiti in such squalor today, or Liberia? Why is it such a corrupt mess of squalor? And it's like, because it was designed to be that way, because we broke their kneecaps every time they started running the race. Their kneecaps were smashed, and we were telling them, hey, look, you're a failure. You're not capable of self-government, you failure. And then it creates like this inferiority complex that then plays right back into the type of empire that wanted to enslave the world and bring back feudalism.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
So yeah, I do want to get to the Canada stuff. Before we go there, let me share a quick little anecdote about Francis Marion because I think it's going to resonate with people right now because right now, ostensibly, the chips are down. It feels like we've been losing since Joe Biden came into office, but I do think it does also feel like we're turning a corner and that things are going to get way, way, way better, and we actually are probably going to win this. I think most people believe that. So let's talk about like an anecdote about what was going on in America where a similar situation occurred, because it's really important for people to understand how close we came to losing the American Revolution, and it almost looked like we were going to lose. People assumed we were going to lose. So this is an article that I wrote. Oh wow, I didn't realize it's been over a year now. About this situation, and just to show you like how like close the movie was to the actual story. Here's an actual mural. So this guy, Francis Marion, his nickname was the Swamp Fox. The Swamp Fox was given that nickname was given to him by Cornwallis, who called him like that damn Swamp Fox. And basically he was called that because he engaged in guerrilla warfare. Again, he was a French and Indian veteran from the French and Indian War, and having fought the Indians, like having fought the Cherokee in Tennessee, he saw like what a regular warfare looked like. He saw how effective like ambush tactics were and how effectively they worked against the British. And so he then adopted those after deciding at first, just like in the movie, at first he wasn't for the war. And then once he decided to join it, he said, well, if we're going to do it, we're going to do this to win. Like, we're not going to play these silly games where we line up in a field and fire at each other. We're just going to do it the right way. So here's an actual mural in South Carolina of what their ambushes looked like. Very similar to the film. Here are all the campaigns that he did. And so what happened, this is really, really important to understand. So what happened in the American Revolution is that you had a lot of the fighting happening up here in the early days in 1775, 1776, 1777. They then sail once Cornwallis is given command from Clinton. He says, look, we got to really lock this thing up. Virginia, Patrick Henry had driven the governor of Virginia out of Virginia. He got on a ship, sailed out to Chesapeake Bay, spent a year waiting, expecting to be able to go back on shore, and then eventually just left, went back to Britain, never set foot on Virginia soil ever again. Virginia spent the entire war without a colonial government in charge. And so Cornwallis recognized that Virginia, like pinching Virginia in a double envelopment, was how they were going to win the war. So he sends a ton of troops down to South Carolina in 1777 to attack Charleston and to get a beachhead. They fail at first, but then they come back again in 1778 and they succeed in a second attack. They failed first. They go down to Savannah. They attack Savannah. That was the battle I talked about where Francis Marion, Lafayette, Pulaski are all there. They take Savannah, and then they come back to Charleston. They march north. They attack by sea and land, and they take Charleston in 1778. At that point, they basically roll through Charleston, and the ineptitude of the actual regulars, like the American Continental Army, the ineptitude down there was so bad, like the Southern Theater, because you had Washington up here commanding the North. Down here, that was under a different command. It was so bad that the British drove the Continental Army almost immediately out of South Carolina and had almost a direct line of sight just to march straight up to Virginia. Had they made it to Virginia, the war's over and America doesn't happen. Wow. The only thing standing between Cornwallis and the guy that Cornwallis sends down there to do all this, to be kind of the first force, like the expeditionary force, is this guy. Let me show you real quick who he is. This guy, Benoster Tarleton. So real guy. This is the guy who's portraying him in the film, and ruthless. He's considered kind of like a spendthrift. He's kind of a spoiled, rotten brat. His family is heavily involved in the slave trade back in Britain. Very heartless man, a womanizer. just kind of like a total degenerate. He came to America seeking fame and fortune because he was so bad at business. He had failed at business, and he was like, all right, well, if I can go be a great ruthless killer in America, they'll give me, a lordship, and I'll be part of this new aristocracy that King George III had promised Cornwallis. If you go quell this revolution, and I will make y'all the nobility of America, and you will be the new aristocracy. This guy was going to be part of it. So he's a big responsible for driving all of these American Continentals out of South Carolina with his ruthless tactics. The only thing standing between these guys and Virginia is Francis Marion. And so Francis Marion, who was laughed at by all the American Continentals because he was short. He was like 5'3". One of his legs was shorter than the other. He's a very small, meek guy, but he is very wily and he's a fighter.
Yeah.
He assembles this crew of like 20 guys of Indians, freed slaves. His best friend, his sidekick, is a freed slave. Just a total ragtag crew. When they ride into camp, everyone's literally laughing at them because they're all wearing rags and look like clowns, like in the eyes of the regulars. But all the regulars get driven out of South Carolina, and it looks like the war is going to lose. And Francis Marion, with like 15 guys, holds off the British. He then wins this major battle, does an ambush, wins like this major fight down in South Carolina, rallies all the South Carolina people to join militias and basically start these little decentralized irregular warfare campaigns all over the place that he is like coordinating. He has no contact with the Central Command. He has no contact with Washington. He has no supplies. He has no troops. He has no backup. They don't even know what he's doing. Like every few weeks, they might get like a letter from him saying, here's what I've done. But he is completely isolated, completely on his own, and he has to figure it all out by himself.
Yeah.
So with no backup, no support, and no reinforcement, he organizes South Carolina. And it's important to understand that in South Carolina, there was a very, very, very strong contingent of aristocracy there, of like second sons who had moved there because they had no titles or land back in Britain. So they moved there, bought land, started plantations. So when the revolution started, you actually had more people in South Carolina volunteer to fight for the British and British militias than people volunteered to fight in the Continental Army.
Yeah.
The entire Continental Army. You had 200 battles alone in the colony of South Carolina. There were more battles there in South Carolina than the entire all the other colonies combined. So major place, and the entire reason that they're able to win the war is because Francis Marion for 6 months holds Cornwallis back in South Carolina, and he eventually does make it into North Carolina, but it takes him 6 months. They thought it was going to take 5 or 6 weeks. And because of that then gives George Washington time to clean things up north, move south, and be able to meet them in Virginia to prevent the double envelopment. And that's what won the American Revolution.
Wow, that's a sharp story. I got to read your article. But yeah, South Carolina as a whole, but during the American Revolution, that was actually I was working on a piece, a documentary with my wife, and we were surprised to discover just to what extent you had, as you just pointed out, such a huge traitorous contingent. And Britain, the British Empire, had created a real secret police apparatus that gave rise to, and this was run by this guy, General Augustine Prevost, a British general whose nephew became the brother-in-law of Aaron Burr. Aaron Burr married right into the Prevosts and the Malays and the Murphys. They're like a very high-level American aristocratic pro-British clan. And this is what gave rise to, out of this secret policing apparatus that was built up during the American Revolution, probably before that, was what created the Scottish Rite in 1801. So Scottish Rite Freemasonry, which was directly aligned under the British or the United Grand Lodge, or what would soon be called the United Grand Lodge of Britain in 1813. At the time, they hadn't fully consolidated it yet. That was the treacherous arm inside of the United States that worked very hard over the next decades at just going to total war against the Republican lodges, where you had people like Henry Clay and the whole Marquis de Lafayette network that were part of the Society of Cincinnati, which today I think is a pretty corrupt institution, but it was originally No, the Society of Cincinnati was set up in 1783, and it was a patriotic agency for the sons, the grandsons of the founding fathers and the leading Republican fighters of 1776. And the idea was to pass on the traditions, the knowledge, to create an effective intelligentsia that would be able to protect the Republic in its fragile early years going forward. And people like, James Fenimore Cooper, his father ran Cooperstown. He was a member of this thing. Edgar Allan Poe, his grandfather, Daniel Poe, was a member of this thing. Washington Irving, like so many. Marquis Lafayette was the president of the Society of Cincinnati in Europe. Kosciuszko was a member of it, who was the Polish Republican fighter, who I didn't even know about. Pulaski. That's fascinating, but totally makes sense. And that they were operating, if it was going to be successful in France after the American demonstration worked, then it was immediately going to go off in Poland. It was going to immediately go off in Germany or in Prussia at the time. You had people around Friedrich Schiller. You had people in Vienna around Mozart who were organizing to create a similar type of reform that would overthrow the hereditary institutions and especially the Gnostic satanic mystery cults that had infused themselves into all of the different lodge systems. So that was a huge fight. And unfortunately, because the French Revolution was sabotaged, it didn't work. It didn't have the springboard it needed because if it was going to happen anywhere in Europe, it had to operate in France first. That was like the most viable place where you had the greatest potential of republicanism, both in the citizens and the general spirit of the people and the history of France as like a viable, integrated nation. All of the other parts of Europe were very much either under the control of the Jesuits, although France had its own Jesuit problems, don't get me wrong, and Maltese order problems, but still, they were like an intact nation. They had a tradition towards dirigism, like emitting credit for the building up of canals, of training orphans, infrastructure that people like Alexander Hamilton and John Jay, Ben Franklin studied when they were formulating the American system of political economy. That was going to operate with a different idea of value than the British system of Adam Smith and John Locke and all of these British imperialist, oligarchs who had their own idea that value was just buying low, selling dear, feeding pleasure, avoiding pain, like very bestial standards of what right and wrong and value should be. This is all of the British imperialists all shared that same common assumption. Malthus, John Stuart Mill, Bentham, Hume, all of them, they all share the same view that value and the good is pleasure and that which gives you pleasure, independent of whether it's bad for you or immoral, whatever. If it's pleasurable, it should be done. And if it's painful, if it causes you bodily pain, it's bad and should be avoided. And it's like, no, that's an incompetent standard, because then we wouldn't have anything good. Nobody would sacrifice anything for their kids if that was the true standard of natural law. No. So the Colbertists, who were studied by the American founding fathers, understood that no, value is making discoveries, doing something for the greater good, doing something for the future unborn children. Like, and to the degree that money and economic behavior is calibrated towards that paradigm, like we see in many ways with the resurgence with the BRICS and the idea of value, when you look at, well, what's the thinking behind the types of projects which China is doing, which Russia, Iran, Saudi Arabia, what's animating their idea of value? It's not speculation to make money for a few. It's not just pleasure. It's really building a future that's going to be liberated from empire. And that also ironically creates a huge private sector as well. It strengthens nations, the general welfare, but also private freedom, private sector enterprises blossom whenever this happens. And this used to be the American system. This used to be what made America viable and good. And we've forgotten that. Like, we're not allowed to even study that in a serious way in our schools anymore. That's been purged. So we're given all of these like British theoreticians as if like British imperialists inspired the American colonists to rebel against the empire. Like John Locke inspired the Declaration of Independence, and Adam Smith inspired American system thinking. And it's like, no, wait, these were all like horse for the British East India Company and the British Royal Africa Company. Like this is not what inspired the Americans. This is something very different. So we've all been lied to, and Canadians especially have been lied to bad. We sound a lot like the Americans. A lot of us look like Americans. We're kind of like the cousins of America. We all, speak the same language, but different paradigm. I don't know if you want to hear a thing or two about that, or if you want to go through some more
Yeah,
thoughts.
yeah, absolutely. Well, because Burning Bright talks about this all the time because his wife is Canadian, and so and he spends a lot of time with his Canadian in-laws, and so he talks about like having, and he's from Boston, so he has friends who live in Canada, friends from Canada. So he talks a lot about this, about the Canadian mindset and how there is like a difference. And so, yeah, if you would please indulge us.
Yeah, this is going to be interesting because remember I was showing you this thing and this thing, right? These two pictures of the first world's continental railways that were built up through this American system application and through the fires of war. It was supposed to go through Alaska. Why didn't it? It didn't go through Alaska after Alaska was sold because at that same time there was a big fight by the British Empire to keep control of the one last British monarchy zone in the continent. So that's why Canada today is a monarchy. We're under Privy Council control, a hereditary elite that gives us liberty, or implicitly could take it away. I'm going to say a word about that. And the founding father that made July 1st sort of our national holiday is this guy that you see there on the bottom left kissing Queen Victoria's ugly hand. That's John A. Macdonald. He's the sort of the father of Confederation of 1867. And that's when we got a constitution. We were told, but it's not really a constitution. It's a fake. And he literally said, so there were some good things that came out of it, because whenever you build something big, you will awaken creative goodness in people that just by virtue of doing something big, people have to like tap into something good within them to solve problems. And we become more noble. So it's always a bit of a risk every time the oligarchy has to sort of like unleash or loosen the shackles over our creativity, because they sometimes need to, because, like in the case of the United States, it was happening anyway. There's this love of progress, this leap towards understanding that we are good because we make discoveries. We don't have, that was already happening. America was building, like, they went from something like 3,000 kilometers of railroads in 1840 to something like 280,000 kilometers by 1895. So railroads were building, industrial corridors, quality of life was expanding, longevity was expanding. New fields of enterprise that never existed were being created, right, as you were building up a real nation. And so John A. Macdonald, had to unleash this Canadian transcontinental railway, which was finished in 1885. But he said that I would be quite willing personally to leave the whole country a wilderness for the next half century. But I fear that if Englishmen do not go there, then the Yankees will. So he was very clear that if this wasn't done, he didn't want to do it. It would have been naturally developed by rail so this became like a wedge ultimately. And you had a huge pro-American culture at this time in British Columbia. So just quickly when he's speaking, if you go back to 1865, 66, this was Canada. So what Canada was like 4 colonies up here north of the St. Lawrence River, plus New Brunswick. So that was like Upper Canada here, which is part of Southern Ontario. You had Lower Canada, which is more French Canadian. That's part of Quebec. You had Nova Scotia, New Brunswick. I don't know if PI was that yet or not. I don't think so. Anyway, these 4 colonies were told, okay, confederate, stay British, stay loyal to the crown. This colony here on the way western side was British Columbia, isolated, no connection whatsoever to the rest of the eastern colonies. This thing here in the middle is crazy. This is like 70 or 80% of the surface area of Canada for over 200 years was called Rupert's Land. That's the Hudson Bay.
Are you?
Yep.
Sorry, just making sure. Are you sharing the right image? Because you said you're talking about different colonies. I only see one outlined here, Rupert's Land. I just want to make sure you're sharing the right image.
Oh yeah, sorry. So Rupert's Land is the area separating the western and eastern colonies. I actually didn't have the image of the colony specifically, but you can imagine what they are. Like, so 4 on the east, 1 on the west, and Rupert's Land is designed. It's run by Anglicans and Jesuits, mostly Jesuits, who control this thing for about 200 years since the 1690s. They have a policy of manipulating different native bands that live there, and pretty much anybody who doesn't have a Hudson's Bay licensed to do fur trading in the area, basically gets killed. So if you get caught by one of the native tribes that have been influenced by their Jesuit handlers in this zone, then they're mandated to kill you if you don't have that protection that, like, okay, no, here's the Hudson Bay license to operate. So it's this weird weaponization of many of the natives who had been living there. And the Jesuits did this in a very, very sophisticated way. And they were always working with their Anglican cults brethren. Because the Anglicans and the Jesuits, as we've talked about over the, months ago, were co-created in the same year by the same Venetian operation in Europe to be two sort of orders with esoteric and exoteric sections that would then be deployed to maintaining a world empire. And so the whole of northern America is very, very, you can't understand any of it, or the weaponization of either the creation of the deep state inside of America or in Canada, or the weaponization of the natives, if you don't get the influence of these creatures behind the scenes. So John A. Macdonald had to, operating on the mandate of the British Empire, basically had to give a bribe to BC saying, no, don't join America in 1867. Instead, we'll build you a railway, we'll pay off your debts, and we'll buy Rupert's Land. So the British in London forced the Hudson Bay Company to sell for pennies on the dollar this massive territory. Then they gave it to Canada so that they could kind of justify creating a sovereign nation that wouldn't join the United States or, God forbid, become its own independent republic with rail lines through Alaska, which was going to happen. And they gave them a constitution because they're like, well, we don't have a constitution. And they said, okay, we'll give it to you. And if you compare it to the U.S. Constitution of 1787 versus the 1867 Canadian one, it's called the British North America Act. It's a joke. And as I call it, this thing was drafted during the American Civil War, and it was drafted in an orgy-filled just party for like a week in the Maritimes, and it was done because Britain had two confederacies to break up the Union and undo 1776. And as I pointed out again, like this, I love this point that one of the two confederacies failed. The other one succeeded. So the Southern British Confederacy project failed. The Northern British Confederacy project succeeded. And the Lincoln Republicans in Canada, in Ottawa, were wiped out. They were purged. And instead, we were given this thing that said, whereas the provinces of Canada, Nova Scotia, and New Brunswick have expressed their desire to be federally united into one dominion, not a nation, a dominion, under the crown of the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland, with a constitution similar in principle to that of the United Kingdom, and whereas such a union would conduce to the welfare of the provinces and promote the interests of the British Empire. So that's our preamble. Our preamble is to promote the interests of the British Empire. Compare it to like what and this is like, it's good, healthy contrast, right? Because you like just to then revisit something we've all read a million times, but compare it what a healthy nation's constitution should look like, something more like we the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, not the British Empire, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. Way, way healthier than this crap, which, by the way, is another fake, because they say to model it, we want to model it in a similar principle to the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom doesn't have a constitution. So we're modeling it on a shadow, on a nothing, right? Like it's such a head screw.
Oh my God, that's great.
And the
That's
last thing I'll
amazing.
just say here about this, to tie this back to the American Revolution, Benjamin Franklin wanted Quebec at the time in 1776 to be the 14th colony. He came, he worked hard for years to establish like a literate Republican culture, because the French had a lot of sympathy for the American cause, but they didn't have the culture of education. They couldn't read very much. They had that feudal, what's called the seigneurie system, like they had in France, which was still pervasive in Quebec. So the French, they couldn't read the pamphlets of Thomas Paine. They couldn't read the pamphlets of Ben Franklin of Poor Richard's Almanac. They couldn't, without being able to read, you couldn't understand what is this freedom that I'm going to risk my family's security for fighting for? So very few French were able to do that and you didn't have communications amongst the different French towns. So what did Ben Franklin do? He started in his time as controlling the U.S. Postal Service. He set up the Canadian Postal Service in like the 1750s. He went up and he said, okay, you need a postal service to start building a culture where you have, you know, a non-peasant identity. If the only thing you know is when you wake up is the immediate people in your little peasant community that farm with you, and you go to sleep at night, and that's all you know, you don't have newspapers, you can't communicate with other villages, you are a peasant who will be divided to be conquered very nicely. So what he did is he created Canada's first postal service. That's a Canadian postage stamp from 2006 commemorating him. So a lot of Canadians were confused. Why do we have Benjamin Franklin on our thing? And on the bottom, that's the Montreal Gazette. And on the bottom right is Fleury Meplat, who is a French Republican that Ben Franklin brought in, who was a publisher, to start up Canada's first newspaper called the Montreal Gazette. Still exists. Ben Franklin started it to promote revolutionary propaganda. And I say that in the best of all possible means. And also the letter to the habitants of Quebec in 1776, that sort of cut off there a little bit. That's the appeal by the Continental Congress, which Ben Franklin and Carroll and another guy, they brought to Montreal and Quebec to make the case to say, look, hey, send a delegation down. We're doing this now. It was like April 1776. And we'll be 14 colonies together saying no more hereditary empire and new system. We'll be in it as one. And unfortunately, what was his name? Bishop Briand, who is the main Anglican bishop of Quebec at the time, he basically said, okay, if anybody does it, because he was going to win over he was about to succeed Ben Franklin. And then the bishop, because it was a very Catholic, superstitious sort of culture, he said, oh, if anybody fights with Washington, you can do that, but you'll be excommunicated immediately and you will burn in hellfire forever. So think about it. And that was enough of a trauma to discourage so many French Canadians, although there was a contingent of 200 French farmers who did go down to fight under this guy, Clément Gosselin, who was Ben Franklin's Washington spy. Washington's French-Canadian spy in Canada. And then he fought and lived out his days in the US and you know, he's buried in Virginia. And just last thing here. This is the thing. If you look at the grievances of the colonists against the British Empire, one of the key ones, more important than taxation without representation, was the Quebec Act, which was done not because Britain wanted to give their newly acquired French-Canadian provinces more freedom and more land, or because they cared about the natives who were living in this area. No, Britain didn't care about the natives. They would be nice sometimes to manipulate the natives to be their agents but they would never actually care about the natives. It was like anything. But what they did, Britain in 1763, when they won the 7 Years' War and became sort of the world's first consolidated global empire where the sun never set, and they came out victorious against France and the Netherlands and Spain. So they came out with a consolidated world empire. They took control of actually all of the North American French colonies. And then they all of a sudden, 1774, gave it and extended the borders all the way down to the Ohio River. And it was understood that this was like a cage to block. It was called the Continental Congress for a reason. They had the idea of liberating the continent under this new type of system of government, not the 13 colonies. So Britain was also thinking about the continent and losing the continent, which is why they had to like block the Allegheny Mountains and prevent that type of westward expansion that the better Manifest Destiny promoters understood. It wasn't about crushing the natives or about just like paving over the earth. It was really about extending the best of human civilization while at the same time respecting the different diverse cultures of the natives to cooperate in this process. Like this is what William Gilpin, the father of Manifest Destiny, was promoting, is this paradigm, not putting them in reservations and little cages and saying that's your freedom, not crushing them and killing them like Andrew Jackson did with the Trail of Tears, but it was really this idea of mutual dignity. And again, Canada screwed up. We stayed loyal to the British. We became a hub with Aaron Burr's, nephew, George Prévost, I think he's the grandson of Augustine Prévost, the guy who founded the Scottish Rite, who was the Governor General of Canada, who gave Aaron Burr the papers and letters of recommendation to go meet up with Castlereagh and Bentham, where Aaron Burr lived for 5 years in Bentham's mansion, leading up to the War of 1812, when Burr was sent back after he tried to break up America 4 times before 1807 and got caught red-handed. But he was always working with agents in Canada.
Lived out his days in exile. Yeah, lived out his days in exile. Like, was a traitor.
Well, no, he came back. I think he actually came back at the end, right?
He came back, but when he was excommunicated for a couple of years. But yeah, I think he had a weird. He had some bizarre ideas later on in his life.
Oh, he said
talking about Aaron Burr, right? We're talking about Aaron Burr.
Yeah, Aaron Burr. Yeah. Well, he had, like, Andrew Jackson was his guy. He was using Andrew Jackson's mansion in Virginia as his base of operations to carry out the Louisiana kingdom that he was trying to create. And when he was trying to in 1807, when he was going to go to war
That's
with.
What I'm talking about.
Yeah. And then after that, when that thing failed and you had a whistleblower, he had to escape through Canada to Britain. And then he came back 5 years later to oversee the growth of his machinery during the War of 1812. And he was the first guy who put his backing under Andrew Jackson to kill his enemy, Alexander Hamilton, because he had already killed Hamilton, but he didn't kill Hamilton's National Bank yet. So it took him a few more years to get his machinery strong enough with Martin Van Buren, his personal lawyer and assistant, to become president with Jackson. And this was all happening at the same time that you had a total purge of the Republicans in the Republican lodges during that whole the anti-Masonic purges of 1826 to 1840. That was actually a Scottish Rite operation done from the inside to purge all. It was because Andrew Jackson himself was a Scottish Rite Grand Master, but it was only the lodges that were Republican that were shut down. And coming out of those fires after 1840, it was only the Scottish Rite that was dominating northern and southern jurisdiction. And there really wasn't too much. They were like, the freedom forces were super cut down at that point. They were still kind of there, but so weakened. And they'd already been annihilated in Europe with the 1815 Congress of Vienna. So yeah, crazy rich stories here. It's wild.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you mentioned like the party and the decadence where they wrote up that Constitution. That just like we'll start wrapping up here because I'm sitting in my son's room and he's probably gonna have to nap here in a bit. So
okay. Yeah.
Probably wrap. We'll wrap up, get closing thoughts, and hit rants. But just to go back to the well again on this same story, because I feel like this story is so rich, the Francis Marion one. And there's so many rich little anecdotes from you can pull from. So the second time that the British come to invade Charleston, I think first was 1778, second I believe was 1780. When they come back, he's attending this party in downtown Charleston, all the elite from Charleston. He wasn't really much like a party guy. I don't even think he drank. But the tradition at the time was that you would lock the front door so nobody could leave. And that was like the little fun thing to do. And then everyone would be trapped inside. And they probably were doing some degenerate stuff. Who knows? But he was so like he just had this weird feeling. He was like, this is all so weird. These people are so oblivious as to what's going on. They're all trapped in this false paradigm about totally ignoring the fact that we are at war with Britain. And they're acting like we're not at war. And this is crazy. And this is making me really uncomfortable. I have to leave. And reading about this, firsthand sources who were at the party, reading about it from his diary, reading about it from people who spoke to him. I got the same sense as people in this movement probably get speaking to normies, speaking to people who aren't aware of all the stuff that we're going through, that the world's going through right now, to the point where he's like, all right, I need to go to the bathroom. He goes upstairs, he opens up a window, he jumps out the window, breaks his ankle, severely breaks his ankle. His little sidekick, Oscar, who he called Buddy, helps him, hobbles him away. At that exact moment, the British have landed in Charleston. They're landing their troops in Charleston. He sees this happening as he's walking down the street and spends a few weeks hiding out in houses and sneaking through Charleston to get out of the city and escape. And then he spends a few months healing everyone who was in the city, all the soldiers in the city. It was 5,000 to 10,000 soldiers were captured immediately. And that's why the British were able to roll through South Carolina, just because all these soldiers are in Charleston. The British land with a surprise surprise landing, a surprise invasion, capture all the troops. And the only guy who basically escapes is Marion because he got this bad feeling at this party. He jumps out the window, runs away. Oh wait, am I not sharing the right screen?
I don't see any screen now.
Oh, I'm sorry. Real quick, these are the list of churches that guy burned. So even though he didn't burn a church full of people in it, he did burn all these churches in South Carolina, 1780, 1781, 1782. You then also have, where is it? This story. Okay. So this British officer gets captured by Marion. They bring him to like deep into the woods, like deep into the forest, to a place, this island. This guy, Marion, had set up this island fortress that was surrounded by marsh. And like the way that the writers all write about it is they're like, dude, he converted the marsh into like a castle, basically. Wow. And it was like something out of like fiction, out of like a work of fiction. And this British officer, like describing it from his experience going to this place, it was like surreal. He gets brought to this place. He's probably blindfolded. He has no idea where he's going. He thinks he's probably going to be like executed or something. Shows up. They untie him. This is a painting of this interaction. And he looks around and he just sees all of these men who are like at total peace with themselves. Some of them are playing sports. Some of them are reading. Some of them are relaxing. It's like they have no idea there's a war going on. But these are the guys who are actually fighting the war. And they're at like a total like state of peace, total zen. They're not at all consumed by the fact that they're like in this awful war. And if you look at the people in the background of this painting, this is Oscar right here, his best friend, who he calls Buddy. He's a freed slave. You have another freed slave right here. You have what were called Catawba Indians, which were the Catawba were like very closely aligned with the Cherokee. And what you had in South Carolina and North Carolina were a lot of mixed race people whose mother and father were Indian and European. And so because of that, they were rejected by both societies. They weren't accepted by the Indians. They weren't accepted by the Europeans. And they found like a home with Francis Marion. Here's another one right here, another Catawba Indian. You have a French fighter right here. The Huguenots and the French were who settled South Carolina. So Marion was French. Lots of French people in South Carolina at the time. And what happens is that Marion sits down with this guy and he offers him food. And he's like, and he's sitting there pretending that they're having this fancy meal, even though they're eating like potatoes. It's like the most meager meal this author's ever seen. And Marion is sitting there. The plate is bark. Like they don't have utensils. And he's sitting there pretending that they're having this really fancy meal and like laughing about it and joking about it. And just at a total state of like humor and peace with himself to the extent that when they released this guy and let him go, he goes to his officers, to his superiors, and he resigns from the military. And he says, I am not going to fight anymore. These people cannot be conquered. These men, he's like, I've spent time with these men. They cannot be conquered. They are completely free in their minds. And no matter what you do, you will never subdue them. They will fight to the very last man. They will never surrender. They will never give up. And because of that, I'm inspired to stop this nonsense and go home because we are wasting our time here. These men can't be beat.
Wow. And what a great story.
It's a very, very famous anecdote. And it's something that I want everyone to take away from this discussion, that is what this is all about. We have to, instead of blackpilling and dooming and fretting and being anxious about what we're going through right now, we need to look to the future. We need to look inward and grow as people and transform ourselves and adopt that mindset that we can't be conquered. No matter what they do, no matter what they do to us, no matter what they take away from us, they're never going to beat us. They're never going to defeat us. And if once you embrace the sovereign mindset, the first principles mindset, you can't be defeated. You can't be enslaved. You can't be subdued. And that is real freedom. So once we all get there, that is what I think is going to allow us to actually embrace and engage in self-governance once this is all over. So I want everyone to think about that this 4th of July. I'm going to drop the link to this article in the comments. I think this is it's a very inspirational story because it really was. They were going to lose, and the only reason they didn't is because this one guy refused to lose. He said we're not going to lose this thing. We're going to do whatever we have to do to win. And we all have to embrace that mindset and stop fretting over what may or may not happen. But with that said, do you have any closing thoughts, Matt? And then I'll pull up rants and boosts.
I thought that was a very appropriate moral call to action that I think is a perfect way to sort of round out this gestalt, this composition. I wouldn't necessarily want to add anything more to that, but just let that sit, resonate, because I do think that that's totally true. It's the attitude, it's the state of mind, not overthinking and you do have to think and analyze quite a bit. Don't get me wrong, that's what we're doing, right? But at the same time, we don't want to get lost and overwhelmed by all of the material, and it's very weighty. And like you said, the danger of going black-pilled is always high, especially in times of crisis. So we always have to keep our poise. This has been a long time coming. It shouldn't be a surprise. The breakdown of the system, it's been decades in the making. It's like, what happens when you bend a stick at a certain point. It might seem like it's just always the same rate of bending, but it's actually not. The tension's building up. But at the same time, during a crisis, there's a much, much greater opportunity for people to put into question their incorrect assumptions about themselves, their identity, all of those assumptions that were keeping them shackled to the system and enslaved and not being their true higher selves. Those are melting away in a crisis. So we who have been preparing and tuning our minds have to be the people who could give the calm guidance, as if you were on a plane that's in trouble, and the stewards and stewardesses have to be calm and direct people towards the exits. There's a way out. There's a way to deal with this type of thing. There's a new system based on the best principles of what made America good and viable that is alive and growing. And we could work with that system. We don't have to go to war with Russia or China the way some death cult technocrats want. Instead, there's this other better tradition inside of the hearts of Canadians and Americans especially, but also Europeans, to break free of this death cult and join with this other system. And it requires a population which is as informed as humanly possible, right? Which like you said, has an attitude of love, of a certain peacefulness, and an ability to laugh in crisis. Because if you can laugh at something, you're not controlled by it. So you got to be able to find the humor in the tragedy of things. And that gives you the freedom and the creative flexibility to see through what other people cannot see, which are the weak points in the armor of the machinery of the empire. And there's a lot of weak points, and you could see it historically being capitalized on, and it is being capitalized on once again, this time, ironically, by people in Russia, in China, in South Korea, North Korea. Not South Korea is not doing so good. Trump is definitely fighting his way to bring America back into an alignment with this. So, yeah, I think what you said was great. Let's do this before going to the if there are any comments, we'll do that. But let's do the little last plug here for the Badlands shop. So let me just read that, and then we'll transition. Okay. So, having plans for after the show? How about heading over to the Badlands shop, where you'll find Patriot companies with Patriot values? Put your money where your morals are and shop with peace of mind while supporting your favorite Badlanders. Whether you're shopping for everyday household items or unique gifts for that special someone, skip the big box store. Come out to the Badlands shop and support Patriot businesses and Badlands media with every purchase. Find unique items for your home and garden, stock up on food, kids' activities, pet supplies, and even plan for your financial future. You'll find just about everything, and we are adding more every day. Thank you for supporting the companies that support Badlands. We couldn't do this without you. Visit badlandsmedia.tv/shop.
Awesome. So, looks like we got one boost. If you want to leave a Rumble rant, if you're listening to this later, you can go to badlandsmedia.tv. You click on support Badlands right here, and then Badlands boost, and that'll take you to the boost page. We have one from PD Rebel, $60. Wow, thank you so much. Hey guys, just got done watching episode 51. Great as always. God bless. Well, thank you, PD Rebel. Happy 4th of July. Very, very generous boost there.
Yeah, thank you.
And then we have a few rants. Let's hit those. Looks like I saw one from Roger 5x5. Let's see.
Yeah, I'm so bad at keeping track of the comments. I got to get better at that.
I need to get the plug-in that everyone else has. But Astro Emmy, $17. Really enjoy your research. Thank you. Thank you, Astro Emmy. Really, really appreciate that.
Thanks.
And I maybe have misspoken, but Roger 5x5 is always a very generous ranter. So we definitely appreciate him and appreciate everyone else. Thank you all for watching. Think about all that. The 4th of July, man. This is the turning point. And from here forward, we just have to embrace the positive mindset, because I do think that there's something about that energy that is going to emanate outward. And once you emanate and radiate that sovereignty, there are real world effects that come of that. So let's embrace that. Let's do away with the negative, dooming, glooming, and anxiety, and seize our destiny, because that's what's right in front of us.
Carpe diem.
With that said, we'll say goodnight.
All right. Good day, good night, good evening, good afternoon, wherever you are. Thanks, and see you all next week.